du sover, for natten skader ingen, og jeg lover. Jeg vil våke ved din side, og vokte deg i natt. Welcome back to another reading from The Red Line by Maria Schepers. So in the last one, we covered chapter 23, which was called Astral Waves, where our protagonist, Louis de la Tourzel, with his doctor, Pelloc, were attending this religious meeting, and just at the end of the chapter got out of there as the different factions within the group were fighting over who was really the prophet and all that kind of stuff, which we've seen over and over again. And in chapter 24, we are going in to follow our protagonist as he now meets Corinna, who was in this, in Corinna's mom's prophetess's dream. Corinna was associated with our protagonist's past life mother, who was a genuine soul, helpful and of the light, if you would. And so, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that becomes the hook that leads him down the path we are about to follow him along. Chapter 24, The Black Eros. The noise diminished gradually as we walked down the winding mirrored corridors. By the time Pelloc led me into a small apple-green parlor, it was only a slight murmur. The sun had already set, but the silvery twilight that peered in at the window was still tinged with it. Beyond the window, a well-groomed park looked trim and bored. Corinna sat drawn up over a sketch pad, and Christian, the little boy, was lying on his stomach looking at a massive folio of pictures. Just above the ottoman where Corinna sat was a goblin of the naked Diana hunting. When we came in, the children looked up in delight, but they became timid as wild creatures when they saw me behind Pelloc. It's hard to recall the first moment I saw Corinna. First isn't accurate either. The slightly angular curves of her boyish body and her awkward yet coquettish charm filled me with a deep, unconscious desire. Love had never meant much to me in the walking hell that was my life. The episode with Charlotte Bruggendorf had left me nauseated and unfulfilled, and had served only to convince me to avoid the astral world of the senses. I had always been partnerless, a loner, a grim traveler with first a transcendental ambition and later a dark secret. My avid quest for the elixir and then my efforts to escape from the effects of it had consumed all my strength and left me with no time to lust for women. This region slumbered latent, a blank spot on my personal map. I did not know the mad altruistic desire to dissolve into another being, or the torments of jealousy, the subservience that makes you despise yourself, or the violent passion that might just as well be hate that comes when the loved person turns out to be viciously different from what you'd believed, but still fatally indispensable. I didn't know the million faces of tenderness or the blazing desire that distorts everything into either feverish beauty or unbearable pain. None of these things I knew until I met Corinna, the hypnotically beautiful, unconsciously wicked, debased tool of the dark side of Eros. When she straightened up on the ottoman and smiled that timid, bold smile, Wild excitement pulsed through me. I felt like a gawky child before her, though she was still as undeveloped as a Malay boy, with long limbs, narrow hips, broad shoulders, and velvety Creole skin. Her thick dark hair was tied with a green ribbon and framed the narrow, charming face with curls. Her eyebrows curved like an Oriental's, and she had sparkling, slanted green eyes. Those eyes were inexpressibly tender. They radiated a soft light that begged for affection. Her very glance felt like a shivering caress. She had slightly protruding cheekbones, a short, tilted nose, and full red lips that curved ever so slightly downward. When she was serious, her face looked sad and sweet. When she laughed, her snow-white teeth sparkled, and her expression became mocking and shamelessly provoking. Midway between these two faces, she had a gentle and infinitely attractive child's smile with tiny dimples. And she had as many other alluring faces as nature itself. And how hungry she was, how insatiably hungry for the diverse varieties of lovemaking and all the little games that could be played with them. How frighteningly docile and how ingenious she was, while being totally without conscience or scruples. For her, there were no boundaries and obstacles, and no shade of guilt plagued her soul. She simply played and enjoyed. It didn't matter who was set aflame by her glance or how much misery she caused. There was something less than human about her sensuous insensitivity and that careless, carefree laughter. The nymphs that titter in the fantasies of the astral plane are like she was. They are the prompting demons of the nymphomaniacs who throw scorn on the gentle, Isis-like mother and her followers, those faithful women who are the eternal bearers, nurses, and grief-sharers of men. These demons give the fornicators a cheap victory because they have the horrible key, a lack of scruples or sympathy. And yet, though they don't mean to be, they are our teachers, as are all things that cause great pleasure or horrible pain. Thus, Corinna became my teacher. I didn't even notice Christian for a while. From the moment I met Corinna, I saw everything else through a haze for many months, until a series of brutal shocks restored me to normal vision. When I finally saw him, I noticed that he was a serious-faced little boy and remembered suddenly that his mother had been carrying him when her husband died. I was still groping for words when Corinna, stimulated by the presence of a man, dropped her shyness like a cloak. Later, she told me she had fallen in love with me then, and like a stupid fool I rejoiced over the matter. I didn't know how sincere and thorough was her desire, nor how brief, nor how changeable were its objects. Considering her other adventures, she was faithful to me for an astonishingly long period, and even continued to return to me after gross infidelity. I meant more to her than most of the men she ruined, but that was cold comfort. But now she was speaking with a curious provocative charm. "Louis de la Tourzel, I presume?" I bowed wordlessly and took her outstretched hand, making her burst into a peal of laughter. But poor Jeanne had to work hard to get you up here. She described you quite well in her dream, tall, pale, and romantic." Her voice was mocking. "Mademoiselle flatters me." Corinna winked like an accomplice. "Well, you see, I was awfully curious about you," she blurted out thoughtlessly. I could hardly speak for the pounding of my heart. "Why?" "Why, Dr. Perlock has told me so many interesting things about you." "I'm sorry." Perlock was embarrassed. "But Mademoiselle insisted I could have embraced him for arousing the girl's interest in me. Now she was looking at me with calculated coquetry." "You will show me your lovely old house, won't you? And all the weird books and your butler and all?" Her body arched toward me like an affectionate cat. I stuttered as I told her I would be delighted if she could visit me when her mother and Jeanne did. Then I reached for the drawing she had been working on, but she put it behind her back. No, it's no good. Besides, Then she suddenly turned and showed it to us. It was a childish drawing of a big-bosomed nude lying in bed with a lanky, horse-faced man leaning over her. Don't you recognize them? I shook my head. She wrote in large letters, Jeanne and Corté. Then she burst into mischievous laughter and danced around the table. My encounter with Corinna left me feeling like any other lovesick fool. I stared broodingly at Louis de la Tourzel's gangling figure in the mirror. I had inherited my father's pale complexion and long frame, but I was also touched with Sophie Pétion's sensuous sentimentality. For centuries my body had only been a changing, hostile shadow seen in various mirrors. My conscious mind had concentrated on my internal torture chamber. Suddenly I discovered that Louis de la Tourzel's body could be a tool of ecstasy, something to be proud of, a thing that could give pleasure mounting to unbearable pain. So I had fashionable clothes made and bought wigs from the court hairdresser. I bought a fine ornamental equipage with thoroughbred Arab stallions and learned to ride. All this occupied a few weeks while the magic thread of desire became thicker and thicker. There were only a few brief encounters. I would send flowers and poems secretly, and she would wave from behind the curtains when I took long walks under her window. Finally, the Marquise d'Anjou, or rather Jeanne Girard, decided to visit me. It wasn't difficult to ensure that Corinna came too, and the rest of my plan was already arranged. If Corinna loved me, all I needed to do was sue for Jeanne's favor with presents, money, and flattery. Then she would smoothly dream our marriage. They came on a strange end-of-April day, on an afternoon that seemed filled with restless, fragmented melodies. The sun was performing a whimsical veil dance with fluffy white clouds, and the wind stirred up the smells of dust and distant flowers. Yet there was still a touch of ice in the air. The sun lit up my house, which was decorated for a rich banquet, and struck glittering shafts through the long-stemmed roses I had paid a small fortune for at the greenhouse. Maurice was arranging things with smooth efficiency, directing the temporary help with barely veiled disgust. When the visitors came, the serious old-faced Christian was with them. The Marquise apologized for bringing him. He had cried, she said, and insisted on coming. I assured her I was delighted to see him. Of course I was delighted. I was drunk and delirious. Corinna was close to me, in my house. Already her velvety, almond-shaped eyes were immersed longingly in mine as she flashed me a shy, dimpled smile. Her slender, pliant body was set off by a scarlet velvet dress, trimmed in antique lace, and a real pearl sparkled in the calyx of a golden lily, pinned over her breast. She was so beautiful, so mysterious, so unreachable. I was quivering inwardly with desire and could hardly control my hands as I bowed over the ladies. As my burning lips branded Corinna's wrist, I saw her naked arms shiver just a little. Pelloc, dear good Pelloc, was there to help me overcome my confusion. He had managed to rearrange his busy schedule just to be present at my reception. He knew how I felt about Corinna and that I intended to marry her as soon as possible. And as a dazed lover, I didn't listen to his veiled warnings and hints. I don't want to meddle, he told me, but I wish you'd think things over before taking such an important step. Above all, use that keen observation of yours to examine the object of your affections. He was obviously searching carefully for just the right words as he continued. It's always a good idea for someone in love to get to know his partner before the wedding. A person might have an outstanding personality and still not be suited to the proposed partner. Desire alone can only justify an alliance for a very short period of time. I paid little attention to his cautious advice, but finally I got irritated at his persistence in discouraging my affection for Corinna. For God's sake, doctor, what's your objection to the girl? She's high-born and well-educated, and a baby couldn't be purer. You think so, monsieur? His smile was resigned. Remember, I've known and cared for Corinna for a long time. I should say I've known and pitied her. Now I'm afraid for her chance to save herself from herself. And I will be frank with you, my friend. I'm afraid for you. I'd like to save you from her, even from the innocent, inexperienced child she is today. What in the world are you talking about, Pelok? Remember how I described her from the first? I promise you, I won't mention this again, but I think I owe it to myself to warn you that marrying Corinna can bring you both danger and misery. Corinna will never be a faithful wife. She's adventure, excitement, and lust personified, and she will be faithful only to the moment and only to herself. All her actions, even her toys, reflect this whimsical flame that will die after it has set everyone else ablaze and flare up again somewhere else entirely. Corinna's just a child now, but within her lies an ancient, debased magic element, something satanic under that dangerously attractive cover, an element that brings ruin and tragedy wherever it goes. Whoever is sucked into the vortex will perish, or at least be crippled, and she, the vortex, will continue unperturbed and irresponsible until some cataclysm destroys her. Strangely, Pelok's words merely tantalized me and fanned the fire within me. The dark illusions were a sweet pain to my senses. I love her, I repeated stubbornly. And if I knew I were to be impaled for it tomorrow, I would still love her. Corinna's turned you into a poet. At any rate, those are eloquent jeremiads. Maybe you are telling me God's truth, or maybe just the results of something you've successfully repressed. Whichever it is doesn't concern me. I may be on the rim of a vortex that will destroy me, but I have to continue toward it, burn my way through it if necessary. I can't avoid it. When I first saw Corinna, I knew I couldn't escape my fate. We stared at each other. Both of us realized I had unconsciously echoed the blue-clad woman of Jean's dream. But what connection was there between the ethereal Marietta and Corinna? What profound mystery had intermingled them in a dream message? At last Pelok turned his gaze, looking sad and worried. Then he spoke softly. In that case, well, I'll help you in any way I can if you care to accept my help. I assured him that I was counting on him. I knew he had given me good advice, I told him, but he mustn't be upset if I didn't accept it. But now the salon's polished mirrors reflected the light of the great silver candelabra, and Corinna's eyes, hazy from the heavy wine, blazed like the fire. Pelok was assiduously entertaining the Marquise and Jean, and Christian found ample amusement in my Indian ivory chess set. Now Corinna and I played a delicious secret game. I was showing her all my drawings, engravings, and books, just so I could bend over her and touch her. She knew well enough what I was about, and I felt her long, slender leg press mine under the table. Presently, she jumped up and announced in a smothered voice that she must hear again the musical clock in the dining room. She had forgotten the melody. I followed her with trembling knees. As soon as we were in the dark corridor, she snuggled close against me, strong as a liana vine, and I embraced the strong body that pressed shamelessly into every curve of my own. I kissed her open mouth and groaned with a tension I could no longer endure. You, I stammered. Look, you've got to leave. I'll hurt you, Corinna. You don't know the misery I can cause. But she was clutching my neck, gasping, Kiss me again, more. I dove blindly into the deep red vortex. I kissed her ever more eager mouth and her neck and shoulders where her dress had slipped down. Then somebody slammed the door somewhere and we jumped apart and hurried into the dining room. Here she adjusted her dress and smoothed her hair. It was frightening how quickly she could compose herself while I still shook with the amorous fire. I stepped up behind her and slid my hand down her neck and her shoulder to her waist. I love you, Corinna. My God, how I love you. She turned her head to face me. Yes, she replied softly, I love you too. Ever since I first saw you, I've wished you would kiss me. So we went back into the salon and Corinna immediately attracted everyone's attention by beginning the clock's minuet in a clear ringing voice. I finally got it, she exclaimed, then continued singing. I retreated into a window recess to hide my agitation. Outside it was beginning to blow up a storm. Tiny pebbles were being hurled against the glass. I rang for Maurice to come and draw the curtains. As he passed the 7-branched candelabra, I noticed how drawn and tired he looked. Poor old man, I thought compassionately. The evening's almost been too much for him. Suddenly the child Christian's voice broke the silence caused by the servant's entry. Is it true that only those who want to die will die, Mama? For a few seconds nobody answered this startling query, and Maurice turned from his work to stare at the boy. There was a strange tension in the air. For the first time, I really looked at that small Creole face with the dull dark eyes. It was an ageless face, serious and almost grim. Wherever did you get that idea, son? The Marquise sounded alarmed. Everyone dies, Christian, Jean Girard said unctuously. But pure souls rise again. The boy's face set in an obstinate expression and he raised his voice. I don't want to die, Mama, and I'm not going to. At this point he looked up and I thought he was looking at Maurice, who stared at him unwinkingly. But I saw he was looking over the old servant's head at the picture above the glass cabinet. I have always lived, Christian muttered stubbornly. The Marquise d'Anjou stood up suddenly. This child scares me. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but I too was overcome by the ominous tension in the air. You yourself speak often on the subject, madame, I offered. But what can a child understand about all that, Monsieur de la Tourzel? She took his hand to lead him somewhere to amuse himself, but the boy wouldn't move. Raise the candle, Mama, so I can see that picture, he demanded. Christian, you promised. You said you'd play quietly if I let you come. Maurice shuffled forward, supporting his old body against the furniture, and lifted one of the heavy candlesticks. The picture over the cabinet seemed breathlessly alive in the flashing light, and Christian looked up at it and laughed. Look, Corinna, he said, pointing. It's spring in Verona. I recognize it. There was a loud crash. Maurice had fallen face forward onto the carpet. The candlestick had dropped from his limp hand and the flames began to eat at the carpet. Pelloc quickly ran and turned the butler over on his back, while the practical Jean helped me stamp out the fire. The Marquise and Corinna stood paralyzed and Christian clung to his mother, whimpering. Then Pelloc stood up. Get the boy out of here, he said softly. Is Maurice dead? I whispered. Pelloc nodded. Corinna told me later that there was a colored plate of that particular painting in an album Christian looked at frequently. She had often read him the text under the picture. It was obvious what had happened, yet the fact that all of the links of the chain had been formed to convey the message to the old, tired servant was more than chance. I don't know if Christian really was the Asis, freed for a moment from the forgetfulness of childhood, or if his spirit merely temporarily assumed control of the child's sensitive nervous system. I only knew the boy's aura had shone with an occult glow in that sinister moment, and the shadow of a powerful being could be seen behind him. Certainly Maurice received his message and thus was at liberty to die. I sincerely mourned this strange and eccentric person of whom I had become so fond. By the laws of similarity, I have always been attracted to the unusual, the lonely, and the introverted. The crowd is more alien to me than are fish and insects, yet I had to admit Maurice's death solved a sensitive problem, for I was determined to marry, and I knew that by Corinna's sparkling luxurious standards, Maurice would seem an intolerable old vulture. Nor could I imagine him controlling a household of maids. It was strange that he had accompanied me right to the threshold of my solitary cell. The intuitive and servile John quickly divined my intent. Looking back, it was probably what she had been aiming for all along. Certainly, my lavish gifts proved a great inspiration to her. The roll of brocade and jeweled rings produced beautiful and colorful dreams, and when I slipped a pearl necklace into her hand, she immediately proceeded to dream that the Marquise d'Anjou agreed to give me the hand of her daughter. Though I was willing to use John for my purposes, the whole transaction disgusted me. I knew too that she was playing with forces that would eventually turn against her, but in my blind passion, I didn't care. The daily secret meetings I had with Corinna inflamed my desire until it completely dulled my conscience. We celebrated our engagement quietly at the Marquise's palace, and I requested permission to have the wedding a month to the day after the announcement. There were to be only a few friends present, chiefly Pelloc. Of course, we would have to put up with Cortet. The lambs presented a knottier problem. We would have to invite all or none, else there would be a bloody revolution. Jean managed the whole thing skillfully by inviting the entire congregation to sanction and bless this union born of a blessed and holy dream. By an ironic twist, our marriage was blessed and holy in exact ratio to the reality of the lamb's religion. I completely renovated my house. The brooding spirit of old Iassis remained only in the library. The rest was playful, powdered Paris, the depraved and debauched city of Louis XV. The paneling was replaced by glittering mirrors and brocade. Corinna knew well how to select the shades that would complement her beauty. She was a tireless shopper, and I was proud to please her. She bought wrought silver salon trimmings in carriages from an exiled aristocrat and added to them gobelins, vases, fine rugs, and heavy fabrics. For herself, she bought fine lace lingerie worthy of a hetera, pointed shoes encrusted with gems, multi-tiered wigs, jewel cases, perfumes, and incense. Her virtuous, absent-minded mother prepared her an elegant and proper trousseau at home, but Corinna, with Jean at her side, reveled in the shops. This shopping and the necessity of concealing it from her mother distracted her temporarily from her amorous pursuits. She hardly had time for me. As for me, I was fighting evil premonitions, deliberately closing my mind to my own uneasiness and Pelloc's warnings. She's still just a child, I told myself. Her body may be ripe, but her soul is still dormant. It is up to me to awaken it. When the first fires have subsided... But I could think no further than that. I was engulfed in the flame and nothing else mattered. The hectic month passed quickly and the long-awaited day dawned. Since the Marquise had gone into seclusion when her husband died, she was out of touch with most of the aristocracy, so most of our wedding guests turned out to be the lambs. They filled the small chapel on the Rue Saint-Michel and then proceeded to the Marquise's sumptuous reception. I can only remember a few foggy flashes of the whole affair, through which I moved like a sleepwalker. The images were wavering and unreal, and they kept approaching and withdrawing, just like the shapes in my astral world. Sometimes I would get a clear image of a familiar face among the gaudy, unkempt lambs, and I could feel Corinna's glove on my arm. I looked at the daring, enchanting profile that sometimes seemed so unfamiliar. I realized that I would have her naked in my arms that night. Somehow, against the solemn notes of the organ, this seemed terribly sinful and yet overwhelmingly desirable. I noticed nothing more until the tear-stained Marquise kissed me in a motherly way and the lambs flocked round to greet us. Corinna squeezed my arm and whispered, "Rosalie's sweating even worse than usual today, and now she's going to kiss me. Do you think she ever kissed Le Pitre?" I had to choke back my amusement. "Only their souls kiss," I whispered back. Corinna grimaced. "Now if Rosalie were a little prettier." Then she put on an angelic expression and offered her forehead for the greasy old woman to kiss. Just then Le Pitre came toward me looking alarmingly exalted, so I quickly grabbed Péloc and shoved him between us so that he got the passionate kiss intended for me. Corinna had to press her face into her lace handkerchief to stifle a giggle, and Jean rushed up to her with motherly concern. "You go right ahead and cry, dear. A crying bride is a happy woman." This promptly caused Corté to start crying, and Corinna started shaking so badly with suppressed laughter that she had to lean against Jean. When she finally looked up, her face was as tear-stained as though she had been crying. At the reception, the lambs sang psalms and ate the fine food as though its presence were an affront. They all appeared to be keeping an account of what the others were eating so they could accuse each other of greed. Jeanne had been careful that none of the leaders should be asked to offer a toast, but her efforts to avoid quarrels were of no avail, for they quickly became sufficiently exalted in champagne to quarrel anyway. De Flin and his family were the only people uninhibitedly enjoying the food. They managed to put away awe-inspiring proportions with methodical teamwork. The two girls had been our bridesmaids, and in honor of the occasion were corseted so tightly their eyes protruded. They were eating heartily, even though the waists of their silk dresses were stretched to their limits. Suddenly, De Flin made some sarcastic remark about Banet that made one of the girls laugh, and her corset and dress exploded with a loud pop, while her poor, smothered body escaped in all directions. Madame Duflin rushed her out in the midst of a chaos of laughter, shrieks, and sobs. She was still trying to stuff her back into the dress as they disappeared. This time, Corinna couldn't control her laughter, so I led her into the yellow salon, where she leaned against me laughing. I kissed her to stop her and continued the business until her passion responded. "Come on," she said breathlessly. "Let's go home to you." Å, senere, når dine øyne åpnes, og dagen skjenker av sitt lys til deg. Vær da ikke redd mens du våker, for dagen din venn, og jeg lover, når den over, vil jeg våke ved din side, og vokte deg